The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show. Psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowsky, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Get ready to talk, email, or post a message to us. We are looking forward to speaking with you and to respond to your questions. To contact us live in the studio, our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, right to your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowsky.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you today again. I'm Dr. Anna Baranowsky, and this is the Bear Psychology Radio Show, bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, health. It's all about conversations and engaging in this important topic today, which is workplace bullying and harassment. So if you think this is a topic you want to engage in and you want to share, or you want to send an email and open up a part of the dialogue, or share some of your experiences, we certainly want to hear from you today. And you can get in touch with us at 1-866-905-7325 or instudio101@gmail.com. You know, this whole thing about being in a job and, you know, finding that it's turned into a toxic work environment, that you're feeling anxious at, depressed, and, you know, possibly even having suicidal thoughts. And some people feel so pushed against the wall, they feel so trapped in a place that they just can't see a way out of it. And, you know, really strong feelings about your workplace, especially if there's been bullying and harassment. You know, it can happen at any workplace, even your workplace. So let's see if we can open up the conversation about this issue. And just remember, if you have a bully at your workplace and you're being targeted, you are not alone. This is something we absolutely have to keep in mind, because sometimes, you know, when you find yourself in a situation like this, somehow you just feel like nobody could ever understand. But I had a very interesting interaction yesterday with a researcher who's doing work in the area of bullying and harassment at the workplace. And, you know, what she told me is that she initially expected, she'd get 200 or 300 individuals who were interested in responding to her survey. And in a very short period of time, she got thousands of responses, which really, really tells us how important it is to keep in mind that this is not an issue that people are living with alone. And somehow, even though you are at a workplace, and one would hope for at least a civil environment, you know, a friendly environment, maybe a place that you want to go to, it's not always like that. And, you know, the bullies that were maybe at school, and targeting people, bullying people in the playground, well, they may be the same people who are bullying at your workplace. Because after all, you know, what's going to change? I mean, if what's happening is the individual who's doing the bullying has this strong need to be the top dog or control the environment or let other people around them feel less than they are, then that kind of behavioral aggression will keep on playing out unless they really come to terms with what is driving their own behavior. So you may end up being the target of somebody who's been practicing this bullying skill for a long, long time. And if you are, I want to just say again, you are absolutely not alone. And one of the things I always like to really encourage is if you do find yourself in a setting where things are not going well, you need to find your people. Find the people that have your back or support you or can support you. Find groups that talk about this issue of bullying and harassment where you can, speak about what the impact is like and, address this issue really directly in real time so that you don't feel quite so alone. So we all remember this childhood rhyme, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, that I think is pretty far from the truth when it comes to bullying and harassment in the workplace, because it can be really unrelenting. You're stuck in this place for many hours every day, day after day. And there's an unrelenting, a systemic, chronic and constant nature of bullying that really diminishes and demoralizes the individuals who are targeted over time. And, there's another phenomena called mobbing now, which is when people actually experience many people driven by one leader who target an individual at the workplace. So it's not like it's just one person. It could be a whole group of people at work who are excluding you or teasing you in some way or so-called doing pranks. And often the pranks can feel very, very bad because we start to, really realize that nothing's settled or stable. We can't count on arriving at our desk and seeing all of our personal belongings there. Somebody might think it's very funny to take everything and lock it in a closet or remove it in some way or, take off programs from our computer or, intrude on our space in some way that is just really difficult to deal with. So these are the kind of things that can happen. We really need to realize that an individual who's experiencing some of this can really feel a sense of kind of dire isolation, rejection, humiliation, and, feel that there's absolutely no way out. And that can lead to very severe symptoms of depression, stress, anxiety, and as I mentioned before, even possibly suicidality. And there are unfortunately cases of people who have felt so overwhelmed, so impacted by workplace bullying and stress that actually there are cases where people have suicided. As terrible and as unfortunate as that may be, it really actually does occur. In the Workplace Safe pamphlet, the BC pamphlet, which was printed in 2014, they defined workplace bullying as any inappropriate conduct or comment by a person towards a worker that the person knew or reasonably should have known would cause the worker to be humiliated or intimidated. And Silverman defined bullying as systemic aggression and violence targeted towards one or more individuals by one individual or by a group. So are you a teacher targeted in maybe a social media attack? Maybe you're a military member awaiting medical discharge and you remain vulnerable to bullying by peers or even superior officers. And because I do so much work with professionals, teachers as well, military members, policing, people in the medical field, I hear about situations of bullying and harassment in all of these work environments. It's actually quite shocking. I've heard some really disturbing stories about people who've worked in governmental organizations and corporations. So you may have tried your best to get along with other people, with the individuals you feel are targeting you, with your colleagues and peers, but only to find that the individual who is really bullying you keeps kind of picking you out and, doing things or saying things that lead to your role being undermined, to a feeling of humiliation, being alienated. So you don't feel like you're part of the team anymore. Now, this is actually a really important piece, because if you feel somehow that you personally are alienated, then it actually ignites within inside of ourselves a very powerful sense of our aloneness. And, as part of our genetic wiring, we are human in nature, rely on each other. We are all from many, many years back, tribal in nature, in that we have to rely on each other to survive. Now, that's hardwired. It's less accurate today because we could move from one environment to another, one job to another, one location, work, career. So there's tremendous ability to move. But if we feel alienated, it could ignite inside of ourselves a powerful feeling that we are in danger. And this increases our sense of being experiencing high degrees of stress. And that can be very, very tough. So, you might find yourself trying to get along, like I said, but it's just not working. Maybe you're working in a factory and you're struggling with ongoing aggressive pranks, or, just feeling on edge and unsettled because you never know what's going to hit you next. What strange behavior, what negative feedback you might be getting. And, one of the interesting things is that frequently it's actually the people who are quite good at their job who get targeted. So if you are getting targeted, you might take a little solace in that by recognizing that actually it's not unusual for people who are actually very good at what they do to be the target. And this comes from a number of different reasons. One of them being that, as I said before, that bully, who's, bullying kids on the playground, most of us understand that comes from a feeling of deep insecurity, a desire somehow to be, better than others, or at least seen as better than others, by putting down the people that are perceived, that bully perceives as being better than he or she. So, when you look at it through that lens, you start to realize, wow, well, does that mean that the bully at my workplace, whether this is a colleague or a supervisor or the director, actually is very, very insecure themselves, or has a lot of negative self-talk, or doesn't believe in themselves? Or when they see a really strong worker, somebody who's very efficient and able to do their work quite well, that they want to target that person because they just don't want anybody to look strong. Well, it's a really, really powerful issue. So if you are interested in being part of the conversation, and if you do want to join the conversation, then I would actually suggest that you just send an email or call. And you don't even have to use your real name or mention the work that the company that you work with or anything like that, because it is actually an issue that a lot of people feel very vulnerable discussing. So yesterday, I had a group of friends come over. And one of my friends arrived earlier, and, just by chance, she was telling me that she'd been experiencing a lot of problems at her workplace. And she was really surprised at how, normal procedures were turned into, major dilemmas or events. So it was hard for her to even ask for, a day of leave or a way to, navigate to a conference, or, it turned into always some big problem, some big deal. And she was kind of perceiving that the individuals who she was trying to get some support from in getting some leave or getting some time for a conference would use shaming and humiliating tactics. So she would ask for some help, and then she'd receive a lot of negative and angry tone and feedback and aggression. And, she could feel that it was causing her to sense that the workplace just wasn't a place she felt comfortable with anymore. And that is a really, really tough thing. I see that Joyce is saying hello to us, and Joyce says, "Oh my God, what a real world problem. Thank you for addressing it. I've been a victim of bullying at my workplace, and thank goodness it stopped. But the stress, sadness, and worry was terrible. Thank you for talking about this." Yeah, Joyce, it can be really surprising. And often I think what happens when people are the target is they then get really uncertain themselves. You can feel somehow like you wonder if it's something you've done wrong. We can slip into a role of trying to please the people or apologize for something that we haven't done, instead of really recognizing that we're being targeted by a bully. And so, the bully's targeting us, and then we walk away from it going like, oh my goodness, did I do something wrong? Am I wrong? Is there something wrong with me? Making it kind of worse, actually, because we're now not only feeling the impact of the bully around us, but our own kind of fearful thoughts and, maybe feelings of humiliation, because it is very humiliating to be targeted in this way. I want to actually let us listen a little bit to an interesting clip that I found, and it's actually dealing with an interview with Jeff Salkin and Cynthia K. Stevens, and they're talking about an incident that happened actually a few years ago, in which some sports professionals were engaged in some very severe bullying, and then Cynthia Stevens talks about some of the research and the impact of bullying at the workplace as well. So let's take a listen to this piece.
People are still surprised at the Miami Dolphins bullying case and the idea that a 300-plus pound NFL lineman could be bullied. Were you surprised when that story broke?
I think I was a little surprised about it, but it does, some of the information that's come out actually does fit with what the research shows about bullies. So most of the time with bullying, the research suggests that the target and the bully are the same gender, and often there's a power difference between the two. So being in a rookie status relative to somebody who's worked for the organization longer, who has higher status or prestige, that part is pretty similar. And often, at least the research I've seen suggests that bullying often goes on for about almost 2 years before somebody reports it. So from that standpoint, the objective characteristics, it sort of is similar with what some of the research suggests.
So if this could happen in an NFL locker room with highly compensated, very tough employees, I suppose it could happen anywhere.
Pretty much. And in fact, the research on bullying, there have been a number of different studies out, but they suggest anywhere from about 28 to 35% of people report having been bullied in the workplace. And those are studies in North America as well as in Europe.
What do they mean by that? What classifies as being bullied?
That's a great question. So the idea is that it's persistent, it's repeated, aggressive or hostile behavior at work, and usually from somebody who's in a higher power or higher status position. And the research that's been done, I guess the pencil and paper measures, they look for a pattern of several times a week of different kinds of aggressive or hostile behaviors. So it could include things like being intentionally ignored or left out. It could include threats. It could include being singled out or ostracized by the rest of the group. Anything that makes you feel humiliated in some way. So if you have a regular persistent pattern of that by somebody in a higher status or higher power position, and the duration that the research typically looks is 6 months or longer.
It can't be good for the organization. What's the impact?
Well, it's interesting because most of the research is focused on the target of the bullying effects, and clearly those people show a tremendous amount of personal stress and often health problems. But I think some of the research on aggressive behavior in organizations suggests it goes much broader than that. So on as a first level effect, you could find that the person ends up quitting or they end up on some sort of medical leave. And then you're stuck with having to replace them. But the research also suggests that if you have aggressive or bullying behavior in organization, that it tends to spread to other people in the workplace. It sort of sets a norm that this kind of behavior is okay. So that ends up permeating the culture. It also is the case that when people witness other people being rude in the workplace, whether it's bullying or more garden variety rudeness, some of the experimental research shows that it actually impairs bystanders' performance. So they're less creative, they're less productive, and they're less likely to help. So we see those kinds of effects just within the work unit. And then when you extrapolate that out, if you end up with higher rates of turnover, those kinds of problems, it can affect the profitability or efficiency of an organization as well.
You're an expert on recruiting and staffing, which brings me to the question of how an organization can cut this off at the pass, avoid hiring somebody who might have bullying tendencies.
So it turns out that there are a core of personality characteristics. It's not that everybody who has those characteristics are likely to be bullies, but there's a higher probability. So people maybe who are less conscientious, people who are more disagreeable and less emotionally stable in the workplace often have some of these kinds of dynamics. And so there are a number of commercially available personality tests that can help you pinpoint some of those folks.
What do companies do to deal with this successfully? I'm thinking that there may be an influence from the overall corporate culture of an organization. Is it really top-down, kind of dictatorial? Is it more collaborative, collegiate? What do you think?
I think if you have a more collaborative sort of culture, you're going to run into fewer problems. I think some of the research suggests that if you have an aggressive culture, for example, there are differences between, say, the Scandinavian countries and the U.S. We have a higher rate of bullying in the workplace in the U.S. than in Scandinavian countries. And if you think about their cultures, which tend to be more egalitarian, just doesn't support that sort of interpersonal aggression.
All right, Cindy Stevens, Associate Professor, University of Maryland, Robert H. Smith School of Business. Thank you for being with us.
That is exactly what I've been hearing about in terms of bullying and harassment. And she mentioned a couple of things that I thought were particularly interesting. One of them being bullying kind of leads to more bullying. It leads to this feeling that somehow the environment itself is not safe. She also talked about personalities, particularly individuals who were lower in conscientiousness. They were disagreeable and emotionally unstable, or people that, you didn't really know what was going to come next from them. What it makes me wonder about is which well-known personalities currently in our world today, hitting the media in all sorts of ways, might have those characteristics. Sounds like a couple of people that I can think of very clearly at the moment. So Kyle Bradley, thank you so much for writing in. You're saying, wow, what a topic, such a serious issue now in the workplace and in daily life as well. It is terrible to have to go through that. And thanks for talking about it. Your conversation helps. Yeah, it's actually one of those things that it's actually very important, is just opening up the dialogue and starting to talk about the issue, because it's very important. Because otherwise, like I said, we can often feel like we are absolutely alone when in fact we are not, and it's become such a prevalent issue. Another thing that Cynthia said in that little clip was that sometimes it's the same gender, so female to female bullying, and apparently the statistics anyways seem to suggest that there is more female to female bullying. But really in my practice, what I've heard of is, bullying that can come from all sorts of places, like bullying where you have somebody who's new to a job, who's being bullied by their management. Or you could have individuals who are actually in management roles who get bullied by a staff member who has a tendency to really draw people together. Now, one of the things that we have to be aware of is that when there is bullying, often the people who are witnessing it will fall in alignment with the bully in the hopes of not being targeted themselves. So if we think of things in terms of most of our actions are geared towards self-preservation and being able to remain safe, we can see how that makes sense, that, we would want to avoid angering the bully. But then what ends up happening is the culture becomes toxic and unwell over time. Madden is writing in. Thank you so much, Madden, who is saying this is so scary and unsettling. It takes a toll on the person's mental and physical health. Bullying has absolutely no place anywhere in life. Yeah, I mean, it's really true, because so much of our interactions can come from, we don't have to love everybody at the same level. We don't have to be super friendly or, fake, kind of pretend that everybody's our best buddy, because it's just not very realistic. However, to create a toxic environment in which we're targeting people, individuals are feeling unsafe, that they're being left out in very kind of chronic and, very overwhelming ways, can really, really leave a person in a very terrible state. So again, if you're interested in emailing, being part of the conversation, I think it's fabulous, because the more people who speak up for this issue, the more we know how important it is. And I'm actually thinking that I might go ahead and invite the researcher that I had spoken with previously onto the show during our next conversation. So this individual is doing research. Her name is Hannah Scott, and she has been looking at a very particular model of using a wheel, and it looks at a form of bullying in which a boss could potentially freeze you out and leave you feeling like somehow you're not involved in all the most important things that are happening. Hannah also says that most people recognize that half the battle, when you're being bullied, is that you feel like you're kind of going crazy, when in fact there's something in the background that's happening where you really are being targeted. And it becomes very important to recognize that there's a reason for your feelings, that you're not just, pretending that, you're having a bad day, that something really is going on. Now, the other thing that Cynthia said in that little clip was that it takes up to 2 years or maybe even more. In a lot of cases, I have heard of people staying in very toxic environments and tolerating bullying over many, many years. But in Cynthia's research, she found that it takes approximately 2 years before somebody who's being bullied will finally speak up. And, speaking up in the workplace, I just have to tell you this, because I've heard this story so many times in my practice. Speaking up at the workplace doesn't mean that it's actually going to go well. And what I mean by that is you won't necessarily have somebody defend you or recognize that, yes, in fact, this is a case of bullying and that it has to stop. The bully is not necessarily reprimanded, fired, or corrected in some way. But what we've seen from the research is, in fact, that, when we blow the whistle on a bully in the workplace, that often it's the person blowing the whistle who walks away from their job. So just be aware that is actually a reality. And I think it's part of the reason that people feel instinctively that if they start raising the issue, that it may not go well for them. And if they really need their job, or if they love their job and they want to stay, or they've been really good at their job and, they don't want to walk away, and why should they? But, in a lot of cases, the workplace just doesn't necessarily give them the kind of support they need to really thrive. And they don't necessarily address this issue of bullying directly. And so you get this toxic environment that just gets worse and worse over time. Hi, Petra. Petra just emailed, and she says, Hi, Dr. Baranowsky. I'm a big fan of your radio show. Oh, thank you so much, Petra. That's so good to hear. This topic hits home as I've had bullying with a child of mine. And the good news is that there are resources out there to help, and we need more to combat this. And I absolutely agree that there are resources. And actually, you know, there are actually experts in the field who are really starting to address this issue very, very directly, and recognize that it is a topic that needs to be looked at, and that there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be looking at this issue, really kind of in a very, very, very direct way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play another clip, and this one is with Dr. Gary Namey, who explains the 4 main types of workplace bullying tactics. And his 4 types are quite interesting, and he's got a whole resource kit, actually. So I would actually encourage you to check this out as well. His website is workplacebullying.org, and he describes 4 primary bully clusters from his book, The Bully at Work. And remember, it's not so much that there are only 4 types or 4 situations. There are many, but I think when you listen to Gary, you'll understand that it's pretty hard to get them all in there. So they've categorized in buckets these full 4 primary bully clusters. So let's listen to this now.
Amy, co-author of the book The Bully at Work. And together with my wife, Dr. Ruth, when we first wrote the book, we tried to summarize all of the thousands of types of tactics that we had heard that bullies have employed against workers. And I'm telling you, it's an inventive, cruel list. It's very, very long. And we knew that we couldn't publish a book with single lines listing all the things that we had heard. So we grouped them into themes, if you will, themes of tactics. And it's often called our bully types. And we have 4 of these categories. And let me explain that a very skilled bully will jump across these categories in a given day, sometimes within a given hour, and sometimes while they're dealing with a chosen target, they will switch gears and try different things too. But of course, the common theme to all types of bullying is that the bully has the need to control another person. So that's what they all share. The first type, which we call the screaming Mimi, is a vein-bulging maniac who prefers a public setting. They're trying to control the emotional climate of the workplace. They want to instill fear in the heart of the target so that they will be paralyzed. Pure deer in the headlights paralysis, and they won't know what hit them. In fact, what they hit them with is so absolutely unnerving and destabilizing, the jaw drops along with the shocked look. And of course, the second ulterior motive there, the secondary motive, I should say, is to actually paralyze the work group too, because they don't want coworkers getting in their face. And so they are going to cower in fear, worried that they are next, and later they will probably become allies of the bully. But that's the screaming Mimi. They're going to curse and yell and throw things. To me, it's the stereotype of the prototype of the bully. But in reality, we know from our research, it's statistically the rarest form. Now, the most damaging family of tactics are implemented by the constant critic. And this type of bully is the one that's going to get you behind closed doors for plausible deniability. And by that, I mean it's always going to be turned into a she said situation. The targeted person, the victim, will never be believed, and whereas since the majority of bullies are managers, the manager will always be believed. And since there was no recording, although there could be a recording, and since there's no record, although there could be a record, the target is usually not believed. And the primary tactic here is to actually misuse performance appraisal system. You're going to go in there, a typical scenario, new supervisor, veteran worker. They seek the veteran go-to expert, the one who's more technically skilled and really well liked. And for those threatening reasons, choose that person as the target. And they tear into them. I always thought the South African book, Hyenas at Work, was a great title because they talk about, tearing flesh from bone there. And these predators can be quite vicious. And behind closed doors, there's total deniability. What is the bully trying to control in this category, this theme? And this is why they're the most traumatizing. They're trying to control the person's own identity. They're going to crawl into their psyche and try and redefine the thoroughly competent person as incompetent. The third category that we chose for our book, Bully at Work, is the smarmy two-headed snake. Well, the two-headed snake, who happens to be smarmy and adopts passive-aggressive techniques and Jekyll and Hyde, backstabber, rumor mongerer. And when they're a supervisor, another technique they use is they fail to stop rumors. So that a person, what they're controlling, you see, with this, is a person's reputation. So that if they're lucky enough to get to safety in another unit, they will be welcomed at the new unit with one foot in cement. They will be told, you can't do what you did at that last place because the supervisor called me and told me about your poor performance. So you've got that going against them. So that's the whole point of reputation. And beware of a hugger. The two-headed snake is an early hugger. While they're embracing you, they're basically just going up and down your rib cage looking for a place to stick in the shiv. That's the thing. Now, those first three types of tactics are acts of commission, of doing things to people. So Ruth and I were kind of stuck coming up with the fourth category, and the catch-all is basically this huge family of tactics that are all involved with withholding resources. And we call that type of bully the gatekeeper. And this doesn't have to be a boss. As you know, not all bullies are bosses. And this is where that powerful and narcissistic and superior in her head administrative assistant, or his head, administrative assistant, lowly subordinate though they be in the org chart, this is the person who can actually grind everything to a halt, because every piece of information passes through their desk, and they only let through that which they want to let through. And by filtering out information, key information, to hated people and depriving them of vital information, they can actually screw many, many workers. And so what you have here is control of deadlines. Unrealistic deadlines create unbelievable stress. Another point about bullying: only the target gets the unrealistic deadline. Everyone else enjoys ample time to learn what to do and finish the project. Another thing that is commonly withheld is not just fraternization or allowing to be social, but allowing a person to collaborate on technical aspects of a project. So they're denied information from coworkers. They're not allowed to ask for help. How about assigning somebody a job out of their job class, a brand new arena for them, and then denying them training to go learn how to do that work? Again, it sounds like a budgetary restraint, but in fact, the budget is not tight for other people, but only for the targeted person. So you see, bullying is discriminatory in a way, just not necessarily always illegally discriminatory. So the gatekeeper controls everything, and they choose the most inopportune times, or from a sadistic point of view, the most opportune times to strike. They strike at a person at a time of great vulnerability, psychological or physical. First day back from chemotherapy, first day back after a divorce, first day back after a marriage, first day back to work from vacation, a very relaxing vacation, and the misery is then inflicted from that point on. So the timing is something that is a timing of the misery inflicted is something else that the gatekeeper controls.
So that was Dr. Gary Nemi, and he was talking about the 4 workplace bully types. And I just love this because he did a really good job of identifying the 4 types as: 1, the screaming Mimi; 2 is the constant critic; 3, the two-headed snake. Well, he called it the smarmy snake, passive aggressive; and 4, the gatekeeper of resources. So, if you're interested in his work, it's The Bully at Work, and the website is workplacebullying.org. And it seems that from my look at the website, there were many, many resources that were available, which is absolutely great, because it's nice to realize that there are a lot of people out there talking directly about this issue and really trying to raise awareness about it so people don't feel so isolated and alone. Hi, Ron. Ron just sent in a message. And he says, back in my day, bullies were dealt with a bullying back at them. Sometimes a fight, sometimes giving it right back to them. And in the meantime, the bullying stopped since the bully no longer had a platform to bully. Yeah, well, I can see that, it's not really okay for us to, be like taken on the aggression from another person. So finding strategies to stop the bully in their tracks is actually really important. But it becomes a question of what are the strategies that actually work today in the workplace. And, that's actually a really, in some ways, Ron, you've hit on something that's really important, which is that we don't have to simply take on the negativity, like, apologizing for something that we haven't done, or cowering in front of the bully, and, playing that kind of game can be very, can actually heighten the bullying response. You're right. Hi, Shane. Thank you for writing in. Shane says the clips are interesting. Bullying is horrible, devastating, and terrible thing for people. It's sick, unnecessary, and can be damaging for life. There should be very tough laws regarding it, and that would stop a lot of bullies. Yeah, I do agree. It can actually be incredibly damaging and leave a person who actually hasn't done anything wrong feeling like somehow they're very, very wrong. And that can be extremely tough. So I was talking before about Hannah Scott, who's a researcher and doing some interesting work at UOIT. And Hannah has wrote a article that was just published September 2018 in Workplace Health and Safety. And the article is really looking at the Duluth model to workplace bullying. I'm going to just go over it really quickly with you so you have a sense of what it is. And just to clarify, Dr. Scott is a PhD researcher, and she's with the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, and you can actually find her online as well. Her website can give you some more information about what she's doing and the kind of research she's engaged in as well. So you can actually find her right online if you just Google Hannah Scott and type in University of Ontario Institute of Technology, and her pages will come right up. So this is the workplace power control wheel that I'm going to refer to, and it's pertaining specifically to workplace bullying, and it uses this Duluth model. And there are a number of things on the model that are really quite interesting. And they're using this as a basis for training both workers and employees to look at this whole issue of bullying at the workplace. So here are the highlights of it. So in the bullying setting, there's the use of coercion and threats. Basically making and or carrying out threats to do something to hurt the worker or make work exceptionally difficult, like threatening to shut down the facility, forcing the workers to engage in illegal or unsafe work, do things faster even if it means being unsafe. The next one is using intimidation, making workers feel uncomfortable or afraid by using looks, actions, gestures, even smashing things or destroying property. I cannot tell you how often I have heard from workers that people have come to their private desks and taken things and destroyed them, or done things with property that they have not been given permission to do, and how unsettling that really is. The next one is using emotional abuse, putting workers down, making workers feel bad about themselves, name calling, making workers think they're crazy, playing mind games, humiliating workers, making workers feel guilty. The next one is using isolation. So personally, I think the use of isolation is probably the most toxic one, just because we're really creatures of we're social creatures. And it's important for us to feel connected and to feel like somehow we belong. So if we feel alienated or isolated, it can lead to an unbearable feelings of stress and depression. So using isolation, which is basically controlling what workers do, who they work with, who they talk to, controlling what's read, where the workers go, limiting outside environment involvement and contact. So this might be even like not allowing them to leave their desk to go to the office party. They are the only ones who have to sit at their desk while everybody is released from their duties to go to a party or to go to some kind of event that everybody is involved in and included in, except this one person. You can imagine how bad that would feel. Minimizing, denying, and blaming is the next one, making light of abuse and not taking concerns about it seriously, denying the abuse happened, shifting responsibility of the abuse to the worker, blaming the worker for the abuse. Now, I just want to say that, you know, my experience has been that the bully can be in any position, not just managers or individuals who are at higher levels. It could be, colleagues at a lower kind of a entry level in an organization. It's not necessarily a management to employee issue. It can happen at any level. It could also happen where some staff that report to a manager could start targeting the manager, even mobbing the manager, which is this phenomena of one individual leading a group of other employees to target somebody. And the somebody could be anybody. The next one is using coworkers. Many workers feel guilty about the work levels of other workers, using coworkers to relay messages from the employer, threatening to terminate coworkers if tasks are not done. Another one is using employer privilege, treating workers like servants, making decisions without worker input, acting like an authoritarian, being the one to decide on work tasks and defining work levels. And then finally, using economic abuse, threatening to terminate workers and or to reduce pay, to ruin workers' reputation in the sector, forcing volunteer work, or withholding pay. So this wheel is being used to teach employers about what might be happening, the kinds of things they need to be aware of, what they might do, how they might deal with the issue in general. And they're finding, Dr. Hannah Scott is finding that this model is an effective tool in education and training to prevent violence in relationships. Be very, very interested to see how she does with her work and how it's progressing, because, you know, as we know, it certainly is very, very crucial that, we can find a way to deal with this very important issue, given that we spend so many hours of our day at the workplace. So, hi, Stan. Thank you so much for emailing. Stan's just saying, all I could say is thank you. Well, thank you back for raising your voice to this issue and recognizing how important it is. I also want to say a little bit about the stats from what I've done in terms of the research. So what we know is that 1 in 6 workers has been bullied. And those are the ones, remember, those are the people who have actually spoken up. Doesn't mean that the numbers are not higher. I suspect they're actually higher. 1 in 5 workers has seen a colleague bullied. The prevalence of workplace bullying is 4 times more common than workplace discrimination. It is likely that the bully is being underreported. So that's what I was saying before. The target is typically capable and affable in the workplace. So that's what I had mentioned before, that sometimes it's actually the individual who's actually quite competent that gets targeted. The number of workers who experience bullying in Canada is surprisingly high. In fact, 40% of Canadian workers experience bullying on a weekly basis. Ooh, that hurts. In a study conducted by Grenny and Maxfield published by Vital Smarts 2014, co-authors of New York Times bestseller Crucial Conversations and Influencer Result corroborated the significant numbers of workers. And just imagine this, 96% of survey respondents experience bullying at the workplace. So those numbers are higher. 54% of workplace bullies have been at it for 5 or more years. These are numbers that tell us that something is really going wrong. And somehow I suspect that this workplace bully, I'm going to say it, but I think the workplace bully is kind of suffering, because if this is their only way to really get people to pay attention, just imagine how lonely they must feel. Because really, when you think about it, people are not liking the bully. They just don't want to be targeted by the bully. Hi, Adam. Adam says, I cannot tell you how you hit the nail on the head. Yep. Mm-hmm. Everything that you talked about today is so real and important. Even bosses, managers, and owners of companies have been bullied by employees and peers. Sometimes the bullying goes to outright physical threats and threats to persons, family, residents as well. It needs to be really addressed by law enforcement. Yeah, and Adam, as I said before, I think that we actually have to take a very psychological approach as well in understanding, what's the source code that would get somebody to behave in such a way, and get a better sense that we're not talking about people who are super happy with their lives, because you don't need to bully anybody if you're feeling super happy. There's something very chronic and disturbed about somebody who goes through that route. So what I want to do is I want to have you listen to a very short clip by Marissa Peer, who will talk a little bit about maybe some little strategies about how to get out of this bullying thing if you find yourself targeted. And I want you to understand before I play this little clip, I'm not suggesting that her tips will address all situations. They will not. And sometimes the reality is the situation is so toxic and your well-being is so at risk that the actual answer is to speak up and get the help you need and possibly leave your workplace. Because if it's killing you, this is your one life, and it's your responsibility to do what you can to thrive. So let's see if we can listen to Marissa Peer, and I'm going to just...
Tribal barbs. Let's imagine you're at work and someone comes up to you and says, oh my God, why did you ever offer to speak in public? You should never have chaired that meeting. You were so bad, I was embarrassed for you. And what you say to them is, I'm sorry, I didn't actually hear all of that. Would you repeat that for me slowly so I can hear it? Don't ever say so I can let it in. Would you repeat that so I can hear it? And I promise you, 90% of the time they'll go, oh, me and my big mouth, just ignore me. I'm having a really bad day. I didn't mean it. What's happened is you've asked them to repeat it. They've had to think about it. And they've decided to retract it. And they will retract it 90% of the time. And when they do, don't go, no, tell me what you said. I want to know, what did you say? You've got to also let it dissipate. So, I'm sorry, would you repeat that, please? I didn't hear it all. Will work. Of course, sometimes they will repeat it. They'll say, yeah, I just said, you were so wooden at public speaking, it's actually an insult to wood. And now you get to technique 3, which is to say, oh, are you trying to hurt my feelings? Are you trying to make me feel bad about myself? Amazingly, they will usually go, no, of course not. I just thought you should know that you're so painful at public speaking, you need to practice more, or get some help, or never speak in public again. So although what they're saying is very hurtful and harsh, they don't mean it. I was in Sainsbury's many years ago, and somebody rang my cell phone, and it was Cosmo. Cosmopolitan went, oh, hi, just to let you know that we've done a big article about you. It's in Cosmo, it's out today. And it's on this CD you've made called How to Attract and Maintain a Loving, Lasting Relationship. So I put down the phone and went to the newsstand and got 2 copies and went back and went, hey, Mum, look, I'm in Cosmo. They've written about my CD, How to Attract Love. And she said, I don't want to read that. I'm not going to read that. I don't think you should ever make CDs about attracting loving relationships because you're not very good at them. And I was like, okay, I know what to do. I didn't bother to go to 1. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't actually bother to go to 2, which is, could you repeat that? I mean, this is my mother after all, so I didn't have to say, please repeat that. I went straight to technique 3. Are you trying to hurt my feelings? Why would you say that? And she said straight away, of course I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, not at all. I just think you should stick to the things you're really good at, and then you'll be even more successful than you already are. And of course, what she was saying was not mean and not hurtful, but it sounded that way, and I didn't let it in because I understood her intention. And one of my patients came to see me, and she was nursing her husband through the final weeks of an illness, and he was going to die, and she was very upset. But she was very upset because every time she said to her friends, my husband's dying, they'd go, oh, you'll be fine. You'll find someone else. You'll be okay. And she was absolutely hurt. And I said, but why don't you listen to the intention? What are they saying? And she said, yeah, they're saying, you're so lovable. We love you. You won't be on your own. And actually, she was married to somebody else within a year. And
so that's Marissa Pure, and she has a lot of other things to say about bullying and how to feel better about yourself. So she's a good resource as well. Remember that rejection through bullying and harassment sets off old tribal mechanisms, and it ignites your neurophysiology. So you have to understand what's going on here from a bodily perspective. What is happening to this ongoing stress is that the hormones cortisol and adrenaline, as well as the nervous system, are implicated, and both hormones ignite to prepare the body to address threats to safety, whether real or perceived. And given the very real events, bullying, harassment, false accusations, that are occurring if you're being bullied on the job, it ignites a very strong internal mechanism of fight or flight, but it also makes it very, very hard to think clearly, which makes it even harder. So, hi, Brian. Brian is our last person to email in. This was the best lunch hour that I've spent listening to a program in a very long time. Such a difference from politics and all the other radio stations. Oh, thank you so much, Brian. It was actually a pleasure to address this issue. I think it is such an important one. There's so many resources out there, and I want you to just contemplate, what do you think? Have you witnessed bullying? Have you experienced it yourself? What reflections have you had about being bullied or watching a bully? Maybe you are a bully. If you're a bully, maybe it's time to kind of sit with that inner, deep, dark place that you live with that makes you feel that you have to put others down or target somebody in order to feel better about yourself. And there's lots of people who can help you with that. I really, really encourage you to be part of the solution and commit yourself to evolve to become your best self. Remember, the bully hates being called on for their behavior, and even worse, potentially losing some status, prestige, or connections because of their bullying behavior. So be clear right away with the bully. There, like I said before, there are a lot of really great resources on the internet about workplace bullying. I was amazed at how much is there right now for people who are trying to figure this issue out. There is a really interesting YouTube channel called Charisma on Demand, and they did a very quick little piece on the downside of making positive changes. And I thought it really fit in here that sometimes, when you are trying to improve yourself and people see it, sometimes you can be targeted as well. People might tease you for trying to get ahead or, losing weight or, trying to, take care of yourself, whatever it is. They suggest these 5 tips. Ignore the hating and the hater. Play along with the passive aggression. So if somebody says, oh, well, you're looking so good now, I guess you're going to get ahead of everybody, aren't you? Isn't that what you're thinking of doing? And you can just say, oh, thank you for telling me that I could move ahead. That's wonderful. So, you're not really picking up on the, the negative tone of that interaction. You're just going along with, yeah, it's okay. When the hater says, I could never do that, for example, if you're doing something that they want to tease you about or that they belittling you over, you might say, true, you do what you do and I do me. And then possibly if you're actually being teased by somebody who is a friend or who you feel that you've related with well in the past, you might actually open up the conversation and, share honestly your values about what's making you want to do this new thing in your life. But finally, and this I think is one of the most important pieces, find a community or a group or even one individual who helps you feel better and lets you speak honestly about your own true experiences. I hope you all have a wonderful day. This is Dr. Anna Baranowsky with the Bear Psychology Radio Show. Have a gentle day.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowsky, right here on Reality Radio 101.